We begin this morning with the flood emergency that's gripping northern New South Wales and southeastern Queensland. There are multiple evacuation orders in place along northern New South Wales, where thousands of residents are subject to evacuation orders. The town of Lismore is submerged, completely isolated. More than 40,000 residents are facing a flood crisis that's unprecedented in the town's history. The flood threat is beginning to ease in southeastern Queensland, but the event is far from over. There are still several major flood warnings in place. The Brisbane, Logan and Albert rivers expected to peak again today. Our reporters have the latest details across northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland. First to Kenny Heatley in Grafton. Kenny, what's the latest on the situation there this morning?
It's a horrific situation in Lismore and across the northern rivers this morning, Pete. The river level is just so high and so many homes and businesses absolutely destroyed. Rescue operations have resumed this morning by air and by boat across Lismore. But according to the SES, I spoke to them at 5:30 this morning. They say they just don't know how many more people need to be rescued. Here's more from the SES this morning on Sky News.
We believe there are still people trapped on roofs. We have been looking at that all yesterday and overnight, and our aim is to try and get out to people today as conditions allow. We've got aviation assets up there, we've got our volunteers in boats, we've got partners from Marine Rescue and New South Wales Police who'll be out there assisting us today.
Now, the update I got at 5:30 was that 305 people had been rescued since 3:30 p.m. yesterday, but they were just official figures. Locals have been out there with private boats, with jet skis, with canoes rescuing people as well, and so it could be hundreds more. And we've got the ADF on the ground today, we've got helicopters in the air, and that is in full force today. What is unclear is how many people need to be rescued, and I spoke to New South Wales Police, and apart from that man who was unaccounted for yesterday in Lismore feared drown, they are not aware of anyone else that is unaccounted for, and they aren't aware of any loss of life, but we don't know what is facing emergency service today. The other thing is the Lismore Mayor, Steve Greig, was on television this morning saying that there were 9 people unaccounted for in Lismore and 400 people still needing to be rescued. It's just such a vast sea of floodwater across the region that it's just going to take so long to get to these people who are isolated across Lismore. The other problem is that this water is on the move. It is dropping in Lismore at the Wilson River. It's fallen about 2 metres since the peak of 14.4 metres, and the weather, thankfully, has really backed off, only getting a couple of light showers here and there, and the wind is not too bad either. So rescuing is going on unimpeded by the weather. But that floodwater is moving towards the coast, and it's heading towards Ballina, and earlier this morning an evacuation order was sent out to Ballina residents. Now, usually flooding in Ballina is not as bad as what you get across inland areas because it's right on the coast, but Ballina flooded in 1954, and we had a flood peak in Lismore 2 metres above the 1954 level, and that is on the way to Ballina. And so that's why people have been told to get out of Ballina this morning. Further south here in Grafton across the mid-north coast, we've got major flooding. The Clarence River peaked 30 centimetres below the levee, which is good news, but downstream in Almurra, it peaked 10 centimetres over the levee, so there's problems there. Maclean as well, an issue on high tide this morning as well. Thankfully, the weather is not too bad here, but this is all heading towards the coast, Pete, and so much rural land has been affected. Here on the mid-north coast, homes and businesses are under, and the roads are cut all the way through the region, and if they're not underwater, they're being cut by landslides, so significant dislocation going on.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Kenny Heatley live for us in Grafton. And a little earlier in the show, we spoke to Lismore resident Matt Tantari. 2 of his businesses are underwater, and here's what he had to tell us.
Yeah, I'm so glad that there was hundreds of boat people from the local community, Byron, Ballina, up in the hills that came down and just got busy rescuing. There was people stuck in roofs and inside the attics having to cut metal open. So pretty crazy. I'm hoping and praying that there's not fatalities, honestly. And it was so hairy yesterday. There was whirlpools. There was crazy things happening under current.
OK, let's go to the South Tweed now, northern New South Wales. Georgia Simpson joins us live. Georgia, what's the situation there?
Well, Pete, I'm at the Mungingbul roundabout towards the Pacific Motorway turnoff, and you can see that this road behind me is completely flooded. It is closed up ahead, but we have seen cars driving through here all morning, ignoring those signs. If we pan around this way, we can see that traffic is banked up all the way up there. The Pacific Motorway, or the M1 up there, is full of trucks. There's more than 50 lined up all the way along the road, and this could have significant impacts on the supply chain. There's truck drivers there from Sydney, Melbourne, even Adelaide, and they've been there since last night. And we don't know when the Pacific Motorway is going to open because Chindra is very flooded at the moment. What is impacting this part of the world right now is the Tweed River. There is a major flood warning in place for the Tweed River, and it did peak late yesterday. You can see there's cars going through there now. Now, this river peak did impact towns like Murwillumbah and Tumbulgum. They actually went underwater, and there are people that are stuck and stranded now. They're saying that they are calling SES and emergency service crews for help, but they can't get through to anyone. So it is very clear that our resources are incredibly stretched at the moment. People are being told to stay off the road if they can and not to drive through floodwaters. It has stopped raining. As you can see, it is blue skies now, but you know, those river heights are going to remain high for a couple of days. So the message for people watching right now is the M1 is cut at Tweed Heads. This is as far south as you can get. So if you were thinking of driving this way, probably a good idea to turn around and go home.